to do my welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. I know your baby's now 8 months, so we've been waiting a while, right? 8 months? Yeah, my baby's
Just
now
about.
10. Oh man,
Yay.
yeah. So
How sweet.
very sweet. He's not walking just yet, so I've got a little bit of more relaxation time. Not too much more, so
Nope, not
yeah.
too much. Once they're ready to go, they will do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So for people who could not possibly know you, give us a little bit of your background and how you got into quantum biology, how you got into birthing using these principles, and yeah, let's go from there.
hmm Sure. My background, I decided I figured out that I wanted to do birth work pretty early on in my life, but I was one of those people that wanted to um, really do it after I had kids. But I've kind of have seen that there's really a great need to support women in birth now. So even though I'm in the midst of having my babies right now, I've
Yeah.
just kind of gotten pulled into that, and that's partly through my own experiences. My husband discovered Jack Cruse's work online. And so he started bringing some of these concepts while we were pregnant with our first baby. That was back in 2011.
Wow. Yeah.
And so he was, disconnecting the power in our bedroom. So we would have like no EMFs. We were just doing candlelight. We just, had a really beautiful first birth. So I feel really fortunate in that. I had complete trust in the process because I had been reading midwifery textbooks for like 5 years by that point, and I just trusted the process. But then I kind of decided to go back to school and finish my degree. And I was even kind of thinking of maybe becoming an OB because that was like, even though I knew about midwifery and really honored midwifery as a path, I was like looking into, um, OBs earn more money. So part of it was definitely like the money question.
Yeah. Well, if you're
and
gonna put the effort in, yeah.
Yeah, so I went back to school, got a biology psychology degree, but right at the end, as I was starting to look at like med schools and that kind of thing, I was like, whoa, oh no. And it was like kind of a screeching backpedal when I realized that I actually didn't have the heart for that. I didn't really want surgical training. I honor that people do that. It's a really important thing to be able to do, but it feels a little bit like overdone and just like it wasn't the right path for me. In that time, it was like going to online school. I had an online job to take care of that. So even though we had kind of been doing quantum biology things for my, during pregnancy, in the following years, we kind of fell out of it and we moved to the city, was living in Portland in an upstairs apartment. And like I said, having the online job and the online school, and I started having trouble with my immune system, really like crippling seasonal allergies, allergic contact dermatitis. And then my husband kind of like re-encountered cruise and gave us and was like, hey, let's try this artificial light at night, like blocking it. And I wasn't even thinking that it would help with my conditions I was having. It was only a couple years later because we just felt so much better that we just started doing it and just having it as a lifestyle. And then I realized looking back, I was like, hey, I hardly had any seasonal allergies this year. And then it was like, hey, it's been a couple years since I've had the allergic contact dermatitis. Like this is really neat. I think that it's from the blocking light at night. And then fast forward to after our third baby, we were evacuated from a fire. There was a wildfire. We had moved back to the country because of the lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so we got put out of it during that time. So this is kind of like the sob story part. Like for some people, just like getting sick is the bad part. But for me, the bad part was getting evacuated from the fire, having this really stressful end of pregnancy. We got put in next to like down in Southern Oregon, there's a horrible problem with these huge illegal marijuana grows. So where we were staying was right next door to one of those. So like huge amount of pesticide and just like stressful hearing that kind of thing and knowing like not knowing but not knowing what's going on next door and not really being able to control that. And so when my baby was born, she had trouble breathing, respiratory issues. It was a home birth. And so a couple hours later, we transferred in to get her some oxygen support. And that put me into the NICU environment. And like that was really like the down part. And that was the turning point where I was like, it's not enough to just do a couple consultations a year. I really need to actually come forward and share my story and how beneficial artificial light blocking and sunshine and these quantum health practices are, because it, like, I've seen in my own life how much it makes a difference. And I've seen other people, like when I was in that NICU environment, working, seeing all of the medical professionals and seeing really firsthand what a bullet I dodged by recognizing beforehand that that wasn't a lifestyle I wanted. So seeing the night shift people with, like, women and their hair's all falling out, huge amounts of obesity, people telling me about their autoimmune troubles, their thyroid issues, and seeing the difference between the day shift people and the night shift people, all of that. And then all of the babies. I mean, my heart just goes out to the babies that go through that kind of thing. We were there 100% with my daughter while she was going through that. And when we checked out, they told us, oh, this was one of the shortest rap sheets we've ever seen. Like, um, she really was kind of borderline of even needing to be there. So it was a pretty quick in and out experience, but it still was transformative. So that was when I was like, hey, I want to make sure I really understand everything. So I went and I took the quantum biology certification from the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology. And so that was to just make sure. And it was, I was nodding along. I had figured out most of the pieces myself, studying crews, studying bio. I have the biology background. I had a biology degree. I was already a trained doula. So a lot of the things, like, just kind of put it together. And then that certification helped fill in some gaps around, like, mitochondrial health from this perspective is different than the mitochondrial lectures that I got in school. So that was a really fascinating part of getting this other alternative education. And then recently, I just got a scholarship from Pacific Birth Institute for their midwife's assistant program. So I'm kind of taking another step and sort of right now starting to move a little bit and stretch beyond the doula role and into learning some of the skills that a midwife would have for attending births. So there's like a kind of long, my story is kind of like up and down and up and down. And I'm really
Yeah, it's a
still in the
beautiful
middle of
nutshell.
it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely still in the middle of it and in the midst of it and learning, but I'm so fascinated by nature. And I grew up in a natural environment and, living out here in the Southern Oregon forest, it's really beautiful, and experiencing going to the city and not thriving as much, and then coming back out here. And all of that has really fit into my practice. And so it's been about 10 years that I've been serving families, like doing prenatal and postpartum consultations. And then since my daughter was born, getting more into that, like actually attending births and learning a lot, even more about that process, not just from like a textbook experience, but
Right.
from actually being there and supporting families through that, and doing that virtually as well as in person. And yeah, just so passionate and excited to share this information, especially for people. Like, since I've started talking about quantum biology, I've had more people who have issues coming to me and asking for help. And that's different because when I was just a doula, it was mostly healthy families, especially a postpartum doula. Generally, they had no trouble getting pregnant. They had no trouble with their birth. And they just are looking for that they're like wherewithal to know they needed extra support postpartum. So it, like, the first 10 years was all really healthy families. And then now, talking with quantum biology, I've been hearing a lot more of like infertility issues, secondary infertility, like all kinds of different little things that can come up around pregnancy, that it's not always just an easy experience for families, especially if they're having, trouble with their health, trouble with their energy.
I find that normally and specifically because of COVID, I'd stayed kind of quiet and, I was like, I don't know what's going on, so I'm just gonna stay over here. But I feel when you find Dr. Cruz's work, and in your case, your context is the postpartum world or the birth world. In mine, I'm leaning more towards the oral health. It's all the same
Mm-hmm.
in terms of
Yeah.
you see the improvement so quickly. The quantum biology people are generally very optimistic. And at the beginning, so I would say I started this. I interviewed Dr. Cruz in November, shortly after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And my mom was obsessed with him for a while. And I was like, okay, I get it, sunshine, that all makes sense. But then when you go through the motions and you do things and you see improvements, you're like, oh wow, there's something here. And then when I started to do research to put together an oral health protocol for younger kids, that's kind of when the um I don't want to say rabbit hole because it's so cliche, but but that's when like Pandora's box opened, and there's so many things that connect and don't seem connected. And so it's been interesting because, for example, I spoke to a dentist recently who's like, yeah, when I see a kid with eczema and impaired mouth and all this stuff, people think, oh yeah, just go and drill and fill and bill and that's it. But in reality, you have to reset that circadian rhythm and you have to address what the child is being exposed to then find that radiant health.
Yeah.
So in my case, I have loved ones and I have family members that work on the computer and I'm just like it's similar to the fluoride stare and I'm like, hey guys, you got to do something about this relatively quickly and so just to land the point, like I feel really impassioned to do this and I'm emboldened to do this because the cumulative effects on generations is we're being seen, or it's being seen now. We're witnessing that. We're kind of reaping those, or what's it called? Harvesting those fruits now, and they're problematic, and
Right.
our kids are not healthy. And all of these studies are at least 10 years old, if not older, that we knew the
Mm-hmm.
sun reduces all-cause mortality. We know, I mean, you name it, all of these studies
Right.
come out
Yeah.
that we shouldn't be doing the things that we're doing. And so yeah, that's why I'm here and I'm excited that I found you because you bring in that
Mm-hmm.
postpartum stuff. No, those people need help. I had no issues
Yeah.
trying to conceive, thankfully. But I did have a
Good.
NICU visit and those are the worst. Those are the worst. It's
Yeah.
similar, if we were there for very little time, but it is still traumatizing in many
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember they're like, okay, we're going to take an x-ray. You need to walk away. And I'm like, don't you see that if I walk away, what you're still x-raying him? Like, no,
Yeah.
don't move, So anyways, I,
Yeah.
yeah, it might have,
Absolutely. It's intense, the things that are happening there. And they're, like you said, the research has been done and a lot of times it's old, but it hasn't been applied. But grounded incubators,
yeah,
that you see instant improve in vagal tone in the NICU environment if you ground the incubator. And even if you can't ground the incubator, they can do, any incubator, you can have an eightfold reduction in the EMF load for that baby just by moving them away, like 18 inches of space between the power source and where the baby is sitting, and then like all of the machines that are around it. Same thing, moving them away, even 18 inches. Like, yes, NICUs can be crowded, but if they just had a little bit more space for everything, instantly you see the oxidative stress could be reduced. You can see that the babies would be thriving more quickly.
yeah,
And so I just see that it is really just a matter of time until the environment is better. But there's so much information they don't get. Like I read a study about phototherapy. And so the people were on a right track, kind of, where they're like, okay, well, let's see about how this affects melatonin production because, in humans, blue light suppresses melatonin. And so they're like, what if we cover the baby's eyes and head so the pineal gland's not getting the light and let's see the melatonin levels? Like, for
interesting.
adults, completely. Newborn babies don't synthesize their own melatonin. So they came up with it didn't make a difference. And I'm just looking at it like you didn't need a study to know that wouldn't make a difference because newborn babies don't make their own melatonin. They get it from mama's milk. So, and colostrum has even more melatonin in it than the other milk. So it's really like, ooh, I hope that like all of the information can get out so that people can be trained on this and know what they're doing and not do redundant studies like that show no difference. And same thing, they do a lot with light exposure and they say, oh, it doesn't make a difference if we have the lights on and off in the NICU because they're not really understanding the connection between breast milk and social signaling, and that it takes a long time um, for the melatonin production to be starting to happen. And so, yes, for babies that are 6 weeks and older, all of those things would make a difference. But for the little teeny tiny babies, it's not going to make a difference in that way. And so rather than doing a study and saying, oh, this makes no difference, if they understood that, they could design the study in a way to see, how can we actually make a difference for those babies, because there absolutely are ways.
Yeah. I've brought in a little bit. I am putting a course together and I'm like researching crazy. And I do,
Oh,
suggest
good.
power of observation. Like your, as the observer, how you see that affects how it's going to come or how it turns out. And I think,
Yeah.
my aim is to try to
Mm-hmm.
empower the parents to the best of their ability. Like you can't allow someone else in a coat to tell you what's best for your child. And so I definitely sassed people while I was there. I was like, give me my baby. We're gonna, you guys have
Mm-hmm.
to do what you have to
Yeah.
do, and I understand that. But skin to skin, it was, and I had to have a C-section, and so I had to be transferred to the NICU because there wasn't space for me and the baby at the hospital that we delivered. So I have, effectively had to get kicked out of the
Mm-hmm.
hospital that I was in to then travel an hour to the nearest children's hospital.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there,
Mm-hmm.
like, this is unbelievable, but we need to be together. And it was very clear to me, no, we're not going to get separated. Nice try. We're going together. If I have to drive myself, I will, which I didn't have to, but
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
yeah. So we were there again, it might have been 36 hours, very intense 36 hours, but the entire time I was on liver. I was drinking extensive amounts of raw liver, and I was like, okay, we're just gonna stay up as long as we can, and we're just gonna be skin to skin. And then when they have to take him and poke him and prod him, like that's what's gonna happen. Um, but because I knew the information that I know now, I was like, okay, which I close up with my daughter as well. But I guess the first question would be, what is happening hormonally when you're doing the right thing? You are co-sleeping and you're breastfeeding, and what happens when you can't breastfeed, which I also have subsequently discovered if you've got breastfeeding issues, it's hormonal health, which could be from a myriad of reasons, but any sort of digging is like it's probably your circadian rhythm. And if you've got to check your vitamin D, because I call it the conductor of the symphony, and if it's not there, then he's either looking the opposite way or everyone's kind of out of whack. And so we don't know what's happening hormonally with each woman, but chances are if you're not breastfeeding, it's a thyroid thing. And so that's kind of the all the piecing that I've done together. So yeah, what's happening hormonally when you do get to breastfeed, when you're co-sleeping, and I mean, I know the solution is go get some sunshine, but I find it really hard for people to understand, like, hey, it's really this simple. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It is simple when it can be difficult, and there are a couple different ways that it can go. So, this kind of also relates to the concept of bed rest as well, because women who are high risk are more likely to get put on bed rest at the end of their pregnancy. And that bed rest can be, it could be life saving. It could also be really detrimental depending on how it's done, because it's so often done in a way with that where the circadian rhythm is not preserved. And so they're not getting the circadian stimulation that they need for their hormones to be going. And so, like, maybe it slows down and they don't have preterm birth, but at the same time, there are other things going on. So it could be better. And postpartum lie-in is bed rest. And so we're looking at what are bed rest protocols. And there are basically a couple ways they can go. One is to do it like a dark retreat. And that's how a lot of people did it in like historical times. Would be that after the baby came and mom had the baby, they would be staying in the bedroom where it's nice and warm. They would keep it a super dim, soothing environment for up to a month. And so that would be a very melatonin, oxytocin rich environment if it's all dark. But the problem is that now we have the artificial lights. So women are, if they're lucky enough to be able to do this postpartum lie-in, they usually are using artificial lights and often indiscriminately around the clock. And so that's suppressing the melatonin and the circadian rhythm. So they're not having this flow of all of the melatonin that should be happening if they were doing a dark style lie-in. So same thing with women who need bed rest at the end of their pregnancy. One of the ways would be to do a dark style lie-in. The other way, and this would be in a climate where it's nice and sunny and bright and warm, and that would be to have a airy where the bedroom is like able to be opened to the environment. And in that case, you're able to preserve the circadian rhythm because you have the windows bright open, you have fresh air, you have sunshine streaming in, and so then you're getting the really strong daytime peaks. And the infrared sunlight also stimulates cellular melatonin. So you have kind of two options. One, if the weather's really crummy and it's wintertime, you just hole up in your dark cave and stay as warm as you can with firelight and candlelight and your new baby. Or if you do have that bright sunny time, you can open all the windows, let all of the fresh air in, and have a nice bright time. And then again, making sure that in the dark of night, it's actually dark. So getting sleep lights is really important in either case to be able to have the lighting you need to do care for yourself and your baby around the clock, because that's physiological. Um, but to not be flicking on the lights that put you into like cortisol secretion, right? Like we have like so much of hormonal dysregulation is from an excess of cortisol, which comes from the blue light stimulation or overly bright lights. Even some people, when they start getting into quantum, they switch all their light bulbs out to red, which is great. They have less blue light, so that's better. But they still often will make the mistake of having it too bright, and having a bright red light overhead can still stimulate cortisol release even if it's red. So to have like a really fully circadian environment, you would have that red light down close to the ground so that you're not getting the light coming in, because we have different receptors on the bottom of our eyes compared with the top of our eyes that measure the angle of the sun as a measure of time.
Beautiful.
So yeah, having if you think about a candle, you wouldn't like put a candle way up high by the ceiling where it could catch things on fire. You would have it down low. And, so like even through history, as we have moved further and further away from just relying completely on nature, we still have had, certain ways that we do things based on the technology that we have. So now overhead lights, better for daytime. But for nighttime, even if they're red, I'm like, don't put the red bulb in the
Yeah.
ceiling fixture. Get a lamp and put it down low.
When
And
I read that
that's
even
really
your,
soothing and nice. Go ahead.
oh, no, when I read that your nail beds are even receptors, I was I was like amazed. I was like, okay, I guess I can't, and not that I got that many, but I was like, I guess I can't paint my nails anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
so it's amazing. It's so much out there.
Yeah. Here we are unpainted.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I
I grew my bangs out so that my forehead would be able to I used to have bangs. If you see some
oh,
of my old like headshots and stuff are from when I had the
yeah.
bangs, but I grew them out so that this was all like that I could pull the hair back more and be able to get more sunshine here. Yeah.
I live in Colorado and every time we go to the park and I see kids with the sunscreen slathered, I'm just like, oh, please. And
Mm-hmm.
it all comes from a good place. People care. And but the other day, we were swinging at the park, and the lady was like, "I think you should turn your baby around so they're not facing the sun." And I just looked. I was like, "No, thank you." That's all I could muster up. I was like, "No, thank you. No, we like the sun. We're gonna get the sun." And it was February. I was like, "No, we need all the sun we can get now,
Yeah.
in the middle of the
Yeah,
day."
I read a paper out of Australia about sunlight exposure and different parameters in newborn health. So this was babies that were 6 months and younger. And they found the best outcomes in babies that were getting 2 hours or more per day, 14 total hours per week, and no adverse outcomes, even though in the guidelines they didn't say anything about, oh, get morning sunlight and not afternoon sun. They didn't tell them anything. They just said, track your sunshine and let's see, because moms know we're so in tune with our babies. Like we can tell when they're starting to get too much sun. We're not going to let them get out there and get too hot and dehydrated. Like,
Oh,
especially a baby that's 6 months and younger, like we're holding them, they're skin to skin with us. Like we're feeling the sun too. We're sensitive because of being postpartum.
yeah.
So it is definitely something that so like we can trust the body's wisdom to know about sunlight exposure.
I've also, because my background is in food and I just, again, in all this research, I'm like, you people burn when you eat too many seed oils. I've noticed when you switch to tallow, like I've had a few people that I've been like, hey, I think you should get off of it, given my recommendations. And when you're eating the saturated fats, especially from an animal source, you don't burn in the same way that you do when you're eating the seed oils.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like uniform, the way that you color when you get the sun. And so yeah, all of a lot. It's a lot. And I know I just want to help people and to see the
Mm-hmm.
light, literally. So I guess the next
Yeah.
question would be, yeah,
Seafood's a big one too.
yes, yes. I've
Seafood.
spoken to,
And that's one of the things I hear from women, and they're like, I eat so much red meat and pasture based. How's your seafood? Because historically, if you look, like we imported seafood in, like we were like, oh, eat a seasonal local diet, don't import foods except for seafood. Like was traditionally like we would do anything to get those sea products, the sea salt, the seaweeds, and dried fish. In inland, and there was always usually there would be a relationship between people living inland and people living at the sea where they would be trading products to get the benefits of both into each community. And so that's a big one that I see. Another thing, like the red lights overhead, and then the not eating seafood. And I'm like, yes, the oceans are taxed, but families that have young babies that are in their reproductive years, like if there's anyone that deserves to eat food from the sea, that's the target category, because it makes such a big difference for the youngsters as they're growing their brains.
yeah, I have my sneaky way of getting sardines into my daughter is with cream cheese. I'm like, okay, we'll just do it that way. I don't normally like dairy with my seafood, but I'm like, okay, that's the way to get it in her. We'll do it. What
Mm-hmm.
the I guess follow-up question would be what are your favorite tricks to feed your kids? Because I know that you want food that's produced as locally as possible. And obviously, like I always say, we're at the top of the food pyramid because we figured things out. And I know the question of so because my background is not scientific, I don't have the formal way of saying it, but I understand like you want the food to be close to you because it's got life force, it's got vitality. But how do you manage? Because for me, I love being able to an avocado is really transportable, it's really easy, and I can do it anywhere. I can feed anybody an avocado at a moment. I get it organic, but I
Mm-hmm.
understand like, okay, so what would be is it just that in the winter you feed them more animal-based products? And then when the fruits are actually happening, that's when you give them those products?
Yeah, with the baby, I I had a conversation with a friend. I was out with my baby, and we were outside chatting, and she's like, "Oh, are they? I see they're getting teeth. Are you starting to eat food?" And I said, "Oh yeah, they sure are." And they're like, "Oh, what do you like? What do they like to eat?" And I was like, "Oh, they've had some oysters and
Yeah.
some salmon and some raw cheese." And she's like, I don't think of any of those as first foods for a baby. And I was like, well, I'm feeding him from my plate, and that's what I like right now. So that's what he's getting. And, the seafood texture is really easy to like mash up to baby consistency. And so I find that starting them young on that, like my oldest daughter, I didn't know about oysters. And so we didn't really eat them. And she is starting to eat them after, like, it takes about I've heard that it takes 7 times. I think I've tried feeding her oysters way more than 7 times, but she's starting to get it. She's over 10 now. And my younger children, though, I was feeding them these foods from the beginning, so they love eating seafood, and they don't like turn their nose up at it whatsoever. So we eat a lot of seafood. We do eat a lot of beef. And this is very different for me because I was raised vegetarian until I was over 20 years old,
Wow.
before I even tasted meat. So it's been a very like slow and deliberate walk for me of learning how much better. And I had like injuries from high school sports that never healed until I finally started eating meat, like with my joint health. And so it's been careful, and I'm always really mindful about the meat and like respecting the sacrifice that it is, for the
Absolutely.
environment and the beauty. I mean, sacrifice isn't maybe the right word, because that was one of the other like big things for me was I wanted to get into farming. And when I started learning about holistic farming and homesteading, I realized that animals were a really important part of it, and that if we didn't rely on synthetic fertilizer, that we would have no way to grow the vegetable crops um, unless we were incorporating animals in. So that kind of just turned upside down this whole view that I had been taught, that animal farming was really destructive to the environment. Um, and it has been once there were like animal farms and vegetable farms, and they were segregated into two different things. And so, in that sense, yes, both are actually very destructive compared with if it's an integrated farm that has animals and vegetables. So, I try to source from farms that are like that
Yeah.
um, where I can. And am working on developing that here too. We have chickens and ducks and vegetable gardens.
Lovely.
And we also like participate in a local CSA where we can get eggs and meat from farms that are also growing these other crops too, vegetable crops and integrated. One of my very good friends has an alpaca farm, and she says, you know, the alpaca poo grows the very best crops. And so we
Yes.
get all of our garden, our garlic and onions and squash and potatoes from her. And we go over and we get to milk the cow a couple times a week and bring that milk home from the cow, and that's helpful for them because it's more than they can consume, and they, you know, get tired from, you know, milking and everything. She said my shoulder will freeze if I have to milk more than 3 days in a row. I'm like, sure, I'll come help with that,
Beautiful.
that's great. And then, you know, my kids love it, and then they're getting this, you know, milk where they are familiar, like they know the cow, they know her by name, they know her daughter, they know her granddaughter, you know, the cow, like we know the lineage of the animals that we're working with. And you know,
Beautiful.
we, you know, a friend with goats, and we know like, oh, this is the grand matriarch, and here's her daughters, and here's her granddaughters, and they're cousins of the goats that are at the other farm that we drive by all the time. And we can, you know, see like, oh, look at that one, looks like the one at the other farm, because it's all like related. So food is a very important topic to me, and I am really happy about how awesome it is, like living in an area where I've been here for so long. Like I was, you know, born in this area. I left for the years while I was in school, and then I came back and have rebuilt these relationships with people, you know, who have, you know, 200-acre orchard, and that's where we can get, you know, tons of apples and plums and all of that. Like it's definitely something. The seasonal food is plentiful if you live in the right place and can build the relationships with the people. And then, of course, we really appreciate the imported foods from, you know, most of our ocean foods. We live about um, a little over an hour from the coast. And so getting seafood that's from this coast would be something that is on my list of things that I would like to do. I've been chatting with a gentleman who does like to go over to the coast and pick up, you know, a lot of seafood at a time. So we're talking about getting a freezer run to go
Yeah,
and get
yeah.
that, like, you know, to get 50 pounds of, you know, locally caught seafood stowed away.
Like a
So
fish
that's
CSA.
exactly. So
Yeah.
that's one of the next things that we're working on. And all of that fits into the circadian and quantum lifestyle of being, you know, integrated into the environment. Like a healthy environment creates healthy people.
Right. Yeah, I'm into the biodynamic agriculture. I've been into it for a while, and when I read last night, like that, we feel we feel separated from everything, but it makes complete sense that we have forces like influences from the sun that everybody accepts that, right? From the moon, but not from Venus or not from Mars or not from Saturn. And I'm like, we're here, we're a part of this whole solar system, and all of that plays a light into or plays a role in the light story of the food that we produce here.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah,
Yeah.
it's I understand like you want to be as local as possible. Because that's where your DNA. I mean, in my case, I was born in Florida, but my kids were born here, so I need to support their
Mm-hmm.
genetic story to the best of my
Yeah.
ability. And if we move, obviously that'll change. But for now,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, super clear on me and um incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so like
Mm-hmm.
for me it's easy. We understand each other, but I've had friends that I'm just like, gosh, stop giving them the granola, stop giving them the oats, stop, and
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah.
Yeah,
We
the carbohydrates and the sugary breakfast is really speaking of oral health, that's one of the things that I
mm,
see. And I talked with one of an elder, and she said, wow, you guys are doing so good because back in my day, like we used to put Coca-Cola in the baby bottle and give it to the baby, and all their teeth rotted out before their adult ones came in. Like,
and that was acceptable. And that was acceptable. Yes.
yeah, ouch. And so, yeah, like, we are doing well with finding the information and then putting it into play and then seeing what works because through my years of being a vegetarian and a teen and slowly getting into learning to eat a meat-based local diet, um I tried a lot of different things and none of them worked like quantum health works.
Yeah.
Like oh, you're having, I told you I had high school injuries, and like, oh, you have pain in your joints, well, you need to do a gluten-free diet. I tried a gluten-free vegetarian diet, and I tell you, my joints did not feel any better. And it was like, oh, well, you just need to do it longer. You'll have the gluten in your system for 6 months. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do 6 months of this gluten-free diet. I still don't feel any dang better. My joints still hurt. um, Meanwhile, eat some fish and spend some time in the sun and get quality sleep at night. And lo and behold, my joints don't ache like that anymore.
Yes.
So I get it that it can seem subjective, like, oh, there's lots of things that work, but really there aren't that many things that work.
No, and we just jump from our society jumps from media soundbite to media soundbite, and we just accept the next prescription or the next diagnosis, and it's just like, well, who I had a moment when I was doing all this, like the intense research at my mom's house, and I was like, who do I know that's glowing? Who do I know that's radiant? I mean, my parents aren't on any medications, and that's okay. Like that, they're, my guiding light. But who else do I know that's doing really well, that's kicking ass and taking names? And I'm like, no one. So I'm not going to listen
Mm,
to Jess, and you should stop
mm-hmm,
listening to the people who are giving you these bad ideas that are not yielding you this amazing life. So
mm-hmm,
yeah, I got into this and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. My background is not in science, but all of these people in the quantum health field are optimistic. They look good, and they've got answers that I'm not getting anywhere else.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I there's a dentist named Dr. Felix Liao, who he calls himself an airway mouth doctor. When he was like, yeah, and I tell my patients use blackout curtains and we need to restore circadian rhythm, I was like, aha, aha.
Yeah.
You've got someone thinking critically, and yeah, it's in, there's no
Mm-hmm,
way. And then here's another aspect, like there's no way for modern life to yield you that radiant health. At least I can't,
mm-hmm,
I can't see how it works because, in my case, my kids are much younger, and if they do go to public school, that'll be down the road. But every kid in public school is getting a laptop, without the
mm-hmm.
blue blockers, without any sort of education around how to use it appropriately. And so you
Yeah.
see these degenerative diseases at younger ages.
Mm-hmm.
It's all common. Because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. And so yesterday we went to the
Yeah.
library and I saw a book that's like, you know, so and so and so and so have type 1 diabetes. And I was like, okay, that's not acceptable for a young child to have. And we need to kind of return to, let's address the issues versus let's
Mm-hmm,
feel that they're okay. And it is okay in the sense of, if you've got an issue, we need to take care of you. We need to not just say everything is fine. Keep doing what you're doing, because
mm-hmm.
what happens in the future, what happens to your children, yeah,
Yeah.
that's my guiding force.
Yeah, and setting them up to have success, because that's what I think too. Like, it's not just about like the mother that I am today, but it's about the great grandmother that I hope to be. And so, for my children to grow up and be healthy and to be able to have healthy children themselves is set now. And we know this, that the circadian rhythm is first in the womb and then in early postpartum, and that it takes 2 to 3 years to fully set. But once it gets set, unless someone does significant reset work, they will think that that's normal, and so they will think that they're just a night owl, or whatever, that it's normal to not sleep well, or whatever it is, it just becomes normal. And so they're looking at dementia and finding that dementia ties all the way back to like people that had dementia probably had mood disorders, probably had autism or ADHD or something in childhood, and probably had their mom had circadian disruption while she was in the womb. You see the correlation going all the way back. That was research out of UC Berkeley where they tie them. They're like, let's look at all the mental health disorders. What's the common factor? And the common factor that they were able to find was circadian disruption manifesting as sleep disruption. If there's no sleep disruption, there's no diagnosis for any of those things. That's one of the qualifying factors for all those mental health conditions. So it's really a big deal to get it right. And then, with your perspective on oral health, there's like the preconception work and first trimester are so, so important. So, like, having the conscious decision to conceive a baby when you're in glowing, radiant health is a really, really great way if you want your child to have a healthy mouth and then healthy mental health and healthy fertility and all of that later on. So, that first trimester is when all of the major systems are set. And that's when the baby is relying entirely on its mother's circadian rhythm. And also, I mean, of course, the quality of the sperm makes a big deal too. And that, is one of the other issues where it takes sperm like 60 days or more to form and mature. So that whole period, the mitochondrial health of the father is playing a huge deal. So, like, it's not just women that need to do preconception work, but also men. And then through that first trimester, like by 12 weeks, everything's already formed. So if a baby is going to have a major congenital issue, then it happened in the first trimester. So that's where it's so important to be taking care of this in that time. And same thing with mood disorders. Like if a woman is going to have a mood disorder after her pregnancy, most likely she wasn't sleeping well in the first trimester. And so like that early pregnancy time, some people don't even know they're pregnant yet. And,
Yeah, yeah,
it's like, oh, if
yeah.
people could just be more aware and to understand their cycles and know how to take care of themselves in these ways, then it's so much more likely that they will have a good pregnancy, baby will have good dental development and everything.
I've read recently that appropriate oral cavity development, especially or particularly in women, also impacts the pelvic floor and the opening and the structuring of the opening,
Mm-hmm.
which leads to positive
Oh,
birth.
yeah.
And then I mean, you see it in the pictures, and I connected the dots. I'm like, okay, so if this affects your pelvis, then it has to affect everything else, your organs being in correct
Mm-hmm.
position, or even having enough space to perform and
Mm-hmm.
in your brain, if you've got sufficient space, everything is kind of firing in the right pistons. And so just
Mm-hmm.
I have two questions that I just want clarity on to make sure that I understand. So circadian disruption, the first sign is going to be inflammation. And then depending on the mother, it's all going to either be a mental health situation or it's going to be a physiological problem. Is that right? But the origin of everything is going to be circadian disruption.
Yeah, there's a couple aspects. So I have a practitioner level program that I'm creating around this. And in it, we pair circadian and quantum biology because you're looking at a couple of different factors. So the circadian rhythm is controlling the timing of everything, whereas the quantum biology is affecting the cellular energy that's available. And so both really need to be on the level to have like the most optimum health. So blocking artificial light at night is really helpful for melatonin, but some people can still not have enough melatonin depending on their lifestyle. So that was one of the things for me. Like blocking blue light at night made a huge difference in my health. But going out and getting the morning sunlight and getting the sunshine is what then tipped me over into the next level of health. So there's a couple aspects there. And so melatonin is one of the first things that we talk about with regard to like stopping the inflammation cascade, because melatonin has a really powerful antioxidant cascade. But there's a bigger story here. So melatonin comes from tryptophan. Um, Tryptophan also has a really powerful antioxidant cascade, and it's only one of 7 amino acids that are really powerful antioxidants. So the high protein diet, and that's where natural birth community is into this and they're excellent. Like, absolutely, we need the high protein diet. And part of that is because the high protein diet is going to give the antioxidants effects so that the inflammation can't get out of control, right?
Yeah.
So there's a baseline foundation of the high protein diet. But a lot of people who are in the natural birth community are like, the high protein diet is everything. And they're relying on it entirely for this effect and to support the, baby, the growth of the baby and the mom. So it's a good start, but it doesn't do everything. So then tryptophan um, in the guts, because your body can make some too. You have to have healthy gut microbiome, right? Like you said, it's all connected. You
Yeah.
need the sunlight. The sunlight will help convert the tryptophan into serotonin. You need the high serotonin to have good health. And also, one of the things that's speculated about women that have the transcendental experiences in birth, where it's like a powerful spiritual orgasmic experience, they've done some research, and first they were looking for DMT. They're like, is it the spirit molecule? I'm like, no, it's not that. It's really, really high serotonin. Well, guess what? The next step after serotonin in darkness, it gets converted into melatonin. And melatonin has really powerful pain relieving effects. So that's where, when it comes to oral health, the teething issue is really important for having the babies having the high melatonin so that their teething is not so painful. That was one of the things I read in Weston Price's research about looking at the Alaska Inuit and saying they didn't have pain during teething. And that completely blew my mind. Like, well, what were they doing? Well, they had polyphasic sleep. They had an extremely local diet. They were getting tons of vitamin D. They understood the darkness. They had the cold exposure. They were using firelight for infrared, right? Like, they were doing so many like things that now we have to be like quantum health. Whereas for them, it was just the way that it went, right? So melatonin, we think of the circadian melatonin, right? That comes from the pineal gland. Um, and this, melatonin is the antioxidant. We have other sources of melatonin too. Our cells make melatonin when exposed to infrared light. So, like out here in the sunlight, that's giving us cellular melatonin. Cellular melatonin doesn't have a circadian rhythm, right? So, in circadian, we're talking about the power of melatonin, pineal melatonin. But in quantum biology, we're looking at the power of melatonin. Cellular melatonin also comes from diet. We get melatonin in salmon. We get melatonin, a lot of the foods that have the dark red pigments in them will have melatonin that we're getting through diet. Our microbiome, including the microbiome in our mouth, the vagina, the nose, nostril cavities, like all of those are also synthesizing melatonin. So that's a whole nother aspect of the melatonin picture. And then in pregnancy, once the placenta is formed, the placenta is another form of melatonin, another creator, producer of melatonin. That melatonin is nourishing the baby, but it also goes back into the mom. It goes both ways. So the placenta is making melatonin for the mama and the baby. And that's part of why that first trimester sleep is so important. And her sunshine exposure in the first trimester is also related to the risk of preterm birth. And women that have more sunlight exposure in the first trimester have a lower likelihood of having a preterm birth. So that's where it's all like, right? Like, that's 5 different sources of melatonin. So I love the circadian rhythm, but it kind of has to be paired with the whole quantum picture, because otherwise we're not really doing the very best we can. And that's looking at just one hormone. Like, you started talking about thyroid, like we could do the same thing talking about thyroid hormones, right? We can do the same thing talking about like cortisol and the pregnenolone steal, and the whole cascade of the fertility hormones there. So this is where it's so interesting and fun to dive into the research. But I love that it's also just so like, wake up and go outside.
Yeah, great. And then the other point would be quantum
When the
biology.
sun goes down, turn your lights down.
It's so simple. It's so simple. And yeah, and I feel like I don't know. I wanted to ask you, like, what am I missing? Why doesn't it land? And I think it's just, is it just dopamine depleted? Like, when you are plain dopamine depleted, you're not gonna get through. It's not gonna get through, and you're gonna continue to wear the hats and the shoes, and you're just like, everything is terrible. Is that what is it? Is as simple as that?
It could be. It could be. I think that a lot of it is social. So I was had a my background was in biology and psychology, and so from the psychological perspective, we have people that rely on informational like pressure are limited. It's not nearly as many as the people who are just wired to have the social pressure. So the intellectual pressure, people are like when they see that things are going wrong, they'll go and try to find information to solve the problem, and that's just really just a few people like in a crowd that would do that. Most people will look around and see what everyone else is doing, and they'll just do that. And
Right.
so it's kind of on the people that know the information to then apply it and build community around it, because once the community is built, then people will shift and fall in even without understanding the information. So that's a lot of the work that I see, especially like locally on the ground level. Like I was talking about the farms that I participate with. I'm part of a homeschool collective, and we're doing that. Like we get together and we have the kids, and they're doing outside things and being among peers of the kids who are all doing outside things, and that's what we are facilitating for the children. And then the moms like know that I know about this, and so they'll be like, oh, we're getting sunshine, that's good, right? And I'm like, yep, that's good. And it's just like a slowly building thing. It's we don't have to like I don't have to talk about melatonin in my mom group. We can just be like, oh, this sunshine feels good, and it's good for us, and it's good for our kids, and we're just happy. And that I think is where it will. But the dopamine thing is a big deal, because once people are more healthy from feeling it, and their dopamine levels do rise, then that does make more space for being like deliberate about the change.
Yeah, I mean, it took me. I was born in Florida, but I've lived here, and I it took me easily less than 3 months to get consistent sunrises and sunsets
Yeah.
for like the lid to blow off and be like, oh, I have to share this. Oh, I
Yeah.
feel incredible. Oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do it. I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert, and I have never, like I said in the beginning, I'm not really good with computers, and I was like, I don't care. I don't need to know how to do it. I'm just gonna talk, and we're gonna figure it out, and this is gonna get to who it's gonna get to, and I'm gonna find my tribe, and I can't tell you how many times to my husband I'd be like, I literally just walked under the sun, and now I want friends on the internet, like, and I want to talk about melatonin, and I want to talk about mitochondrial health. I did not expect this to happen. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, children are a gift and they come with their gifts, and I am 100% sure that that's the impetus. There's so much impetus when you have a new child or multiple children that you don't even
Mm-hmm.
know why you have it. And I'm like, here I am just going with it and fully enjoying it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you have done some great interviews already, and this is
Oh
wonderful. I'm
yeah.
so glad that you invited me on
Oh,
to chat because it's so interesting. And yeah, I was curious to hear some of the things that you have figured out as a like oral health
well,
information here,
yeah, the
and
main
like
thing
what
is
you'll
that
be
it's
putting
all
in your course.
reversible. The huge thing, which again, I did not expect the quantum biology people to be so optimistic, and I'm going to lean into that because it's all reversible. It all has an explanation and an origin, and it you don't have to accept the diagnosis. Dr. Liao is just one of them, but once you fix the airway of the child, he'll put back implants for wisdom teeth as a retainer to keep them all in. Um,
Oh,
sure, you know that there's the meridian, right? There's the connection between organs and teeth, but there's even I found even someone who's doing into archetypes and problems with specific teeth have a larger role and a larger message that's coming to you. I've discovered there's a gentleman in France that does dentosophy, so the wisdom of teeth, and it's basically, and I don't feel so disconnected overall. My mom's been into alternative things since I was born.
Mama, look at this. This look has three eyes.
oh wow, look at that. A
When
slug.
yeah, when disease comes up and you view it as a message, then that's a huge shift, you know. And so I've never been into pharmaceuticals. They have their place, certainly. But when you kind of shift that, and my husband calls it pushing towards what you want as opposed to rejecting what you don't want. It's beautiful and you don't have to do things a conventional way and it doesn't have to be scary. And it's amazing. And it's amazing. The origin story for me, my daughter falls at the park and develops a lesion, and the dentist was just like, okay, don't let it turn into a cavity. And I was like, I don't think you understand how seriously I'm taking this. That answer was not enough for me. But again, I'm grateful to her because she pushed me down a path of like, I have to know 100,000% how to support her. I knew about Weston
Right.
Price. I'm a former
Hmm.
older chapter leader, so it wasn't too,
Oh, really?
yeah, nothing was too lost on me in terms of what to do. But when it came to oral health specifically, yeah, and then obviously pair that with Dr. Cruz's
Hmm.
work. I know now. I put two and two. Is that a carrot
Thank you, Rollo. Some feverfew.
Nice.
Smells nice.
I know now, and I don't know where it's gonna go, but I'm certain that if a bone can regenerate, I'm certain that a tooth can regenerate as well. And I don't know that I have no certainty. I don't even know anyone that's saying, yeah, we can grow a new tooth, but why can't we? If we shed the baby tooth and the adult tooth come in, who's to say? I think there's yeah, Pandora's box has been opened. And
Hmm.
yeah, there's so much more. There's so much more. The copper story and obviously all of the effects because we're quantum beings and I understand that. I do understand that even
Yeah.
though I don't have the
Hmm.
formal background and it's just yeah, super exciting. I'm so glad that I got to talk to you. Hopefully we can do this again and I'll have better questions and more.
No, you did great. This was really fun to chat with you and sit and kind of, share stories about what brought us here. Because, like you said, there's like a natural affinity, and the community building aspect is so important for this. Like was talking about with the psychological perspective. And so that's part of why I'm doing the online community. Sometimes it seems like an oxymoron to be doing quantum health through the device. So I'm teaching a class later this month. It'll be more of just like a Q&A, but people have been asking me, how do you do this with 4 kids? And I'm going to school or doing work or whatever on the computer. Like how do I make this better? Like, is there something I can do the next day to help heal from the time that I spent on my machine late at night? So we're going to be talking about all that because while there is the science, there's also the practical part of the day to day. And we're
Absolutely.
such social beings that learning from each other and hearing from how other people handle different issues, what are their routines, all of that really helps. And so, like online, we can make community. Like I have been since I started doing this quantum stuff, been making a lot of friends in Australia and Europe and around the world, around across the US, right? Not just so I have like my local pod, but then there's also the greater online pod. And so yeah, the community aspect is just such a big deal, and that's a lot of what I'm feeling talking with you is just this, like, to talk heart to heart with another mom who's like, I want this for my children, I want this for the greater community, I want this for the world that they're going to grow up into.
Beautiful. Yeah. Let's leave it right there because that is perfect. I don't need to make it any better.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Super.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll chat
Okay.
again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right, go enjoy your babies.
Thank you. You
Yeah.
too.
Okay.
Bye bye.